We all know the story of Princess Diana's final days Paris, the tunnel, the flash that never stopped burning. But few remember what came before that light, the quiet construction of another life. A future she designed in secret, stone by invisible stone. In the summer of 1997, Diana was not running from fame. She was running toward freedom. Away from palaces that whispered obedience, away from men who called her an institution instead of a woman. Beyond Balmoral, beyond the crown's reach, she had begun to imagine a place where she could exist simply as herself and, more importantly, as a mother unbound. Friends spoke of her sketching homes in warmer countries, of a Mediterranean villa with wide terraces where William and Harry could laugh without lenses watching. She had started the quiet rituals of transformation, selling gowns once worn beneath chandeliers, giving away jewelry that no longer meant affection, exchanging the armor of royalty for linen and sunlight. Each gesture was rebellion wrapped in grace. Behind the tabloid's noise, Diana was learning to breathe again. She was negotiating charity projects independent of the palace, mapping routes for her new foundation on childhood trauma, and drafting letters about a private school abroad. It was not exile she envisioned, it was resurrection. In the weeks before Paris, she wrote of a feeling she called clarity. Her friends later said she smiled differently that summer, not the practiced kindness of a princess, but the serenity of someone who finally understood what must end so something real could begin. The royal family saw defiance. The world saw glamour. But Diana was building escape disguised as elegance. She had discovered that the truest rebellion is not shouting against a system at S, quietly stepping out of it. History often freezes her in that Parisian night, as if destiny itself closed the door. Yet the door she tried to open remains, somewhere between dream and unfinished journey, a threshold leading to the life she almost lived. So tonight, we'll trace the blueprint she left behind. Not of palaces and processions, but of plans made in whispers, the property she sought, the alliances she forged, the betrayals that shadowed them. This is not the story of how Diana died, it's the story of how she tried one last time to live. Balmoral was meant to be a refuge, a royal retreat nestled in the misted highlands, where heather brushed stone walls and silence was supposed to heal. For Diana, it became the most elegant cage in Britain. Behind its ancient granite facade, every corridor echoed with scrutiny. The castle's windows, though vast, offered no view she could trust. Even the hills felt like walls made of air. Here, protocol replaced comfort. Mornings began with the rustle of staff uniforms, evenings with the ritual of formal dinners, bowing, smiling, enduring. There were no locked doors, only expectations. In the great halls, portraits of past monarchs watched her every movement, their eyes painted with the certainty of obedience. To them, she was another chapter of duty, not the author of her own life. Balmoral demanded performance. She wore its tweeds, rode its horses, walked its moors beside cameras pretending to be discreet. But every footstep in the grass carried the weight of judgment. Behind the laughter and staged hunts, whispers bloomed like mold of emotional distance, of royal disapproval. Of a young woman who loved to openly in a house that preferred shadows. Friends later said she hated the quiet most of all. It wasn't peace, it was control. The silence between family dinners pressed heavier than any headline. The royal small talk, whether horse's duty, was its own kind of exile. To survive, she perfected invisibility, a smile so bright it blinded those who wanted her gone. In her diaries, fragments from those years read like coded prayers. My heart beats too loud for these walls. I think they can hear it. When she walked through Balmoral's gardens, she traced escape routes in her mind, paths that curved toward the River Dee, roads leading south toward London, and anonymity. Even then, she knew freedom would not come by confrontation. It would come quietly, like frost melting before sunrise. Balmoral taught her two truths, that safety and confinement can look identical, and that love, when trapped, eventually transforms into defiance. The stone castle had tried to contain a storm. Instead, it created one. By the time Diana left those Highland halls, the woman who bowed upon entry was no longer the same who stepped out. Behind her smile, something irreversible had begun, a decision forming not in rage, but in resolve. She would no longer live inside anyone's permission. Freedom, for Diana, was never just an idea. It was a plan written in quiet gestures. in whispered phone calls, in the courage of small, deliberate acts. She understood that to leave the monarchy, one couldn't simply walk away. One had to vanish with dignity to build a world that didn't collapse under the weight of the old one. While the tabloids painted her as impulsive, her closest circle knew better. They saw her methodical transformation, not the rebellion of scandal, but of structure. She began by reclaiming time, canceling engagements she hadn't approved, ending the endless royal schedule that had devoured her days. She called it space to breathe. To the institution, it was insubordination. To her, it was oxygen. In late 1996, shortly after the divorce was finalized, Diana started mapping the details of her new life. She reached out to trusted advisors beyond the palace's influence, humanitarian leaders, financial planners, even discreet architects. She wanted a home that didn't echo with history, somewhere near the sea, away from the machinery of protocol. She spoke of a villa on the Mediterranean coast, a place where her sons could run barefoot and where she could walk without bodyguards, counting her steps. She was also shaping a new mission. Her visits to hospitals and minefields had not been the whim of compassion the tabloids claimed. They were reconnaissance for her second act. She envisioned a foundation focused on trauma and children's mental health, one independent of royal oversight. She told a friend, "I'll build something that outlives the title." It was both prophecy and warning. At night, she drafted letters from Kensington Palace, writing longhand beneath the hum of a single lamp. The pages were filled not with sorrow, but strategy. She wrote about educational plans for William and Harry schools abroad, time away from courtly expectations. She collected travel brochures marked with circles around Greek islands and south of France hideaways. There were even conversations with security experts about how to live privately without isolation, a delicate balance between disappearance and safety. Her confidants recall that she seemed lighter in those months, as if shedding the weight of crowns had made her taller. She laughed more easily, spoke more plainly, and allowed herself to imagine mornings without cameras waiting outside the gate. The woman once defined by tragedy was beginning to define herself by choice. What Diana was constructing wasn't a fantasy. It was a blueprint for survival. The palace mistook her silence for surrender, but silence was her camouflage. She had learned that the most radical revolutions are planned in whispers. Each step she took away from Balmoral, each phone call unanswered by courtiers, each private meeting with architects and charity heads, they were not acts of rebellion. They were the foundations of a new kingdom, one without a throne, built instead on her own will. Every revolution attracts witnesses and spies. As Diana's plans deepened, the line between friend and informant blurred until she trusted almost no one. The same charm that had once disarmed diplomats now became her shield. She smiled while she calculated, laughed while she tested loyalty. In those years between palace and freedom, she lived inside a theater where every audience might report to someone else. There were true allies. Her butler, Paul Burrell, carried not gossip but groceries, helping her turn Kensington Palace into something almost domestic. Her friend Rosa Monckton offered quiet companionship, a table for conversation without judgment. Journalists sympathetic to her causes agreed to controlled stories images of a humanitarian reborn, not a princess undone. But there were also eyes everywhere. Photographers camped outside the gates, courtiers feeding selective truths to the press, former acquaintances selling phone transcripts to tabloids. The invasion was constant, invisible, and monetized. She once told a confidant, "I don't open curtains anymore. I open possibilities for another headline." By 1997, she was engaged in a new kind of war, less visible than royal scandal, more suffocating. The battlefield was privacy itself. The enemy wore civilian clothes. Some days she believed she was winning, carefully orchestrating appearances, shaping her own narrative. Other days she confessed she felt hunted. Her charity work in Angola, her visits to Bosnia's minefields, were both mission and escape places where protocol couldn't follow. Yet even their lenses waited. She had become both messenger and message, every step a symbol to be consumed. Freedom, she realized, came at the cost of being watched, trying to find it. Still, she refused to retreat. She installed a new phone line under a friend's name, changed vehicles without notice, and used coded schedules for meetings with potential partners. In letters later made public, she admitted she feared an accident orchestrated to silence her. Yet those same pages carried no panic-only strategy. She had lived too long under scrutiny to confuse caution with surrender. Her greatest strength was empathy, but empathy makes one porous. It drew her toward people who seemed genuine photographers who promised just one respectful shot, editors who swore protection, lovers who whispered freedom. Some meant it, others saw her as currency. The closer she came to independence, the more the world tried to claim ownership of her image. In that final summer, she began to speak of starting over entirely, perhaps in America, perhaps on a quiet island. "I want to disappear, not die," she said once. It was an admission wrapped in longing. She wanted to rewrite the script without erasing herself. Diana's tragedy was not only that she was pursued, was that even those who loved her could not stop looking. In the war for privacy, attention itself became the weapon, and she was both target and trophy. The summer of 1997 arrived, dressed in sunlight, the kind that feels merciful after long rain. For the first time in years, Diana seemed unburdened. Those who saw her in July remember laughter, bare feet, the easy grace of someone who had stopped apologizing for being alive. She was traveling again not as a princess, but as a woman with a passport and her own agenda. On Dodi Al-Fayed's yacht Jonical, she allowed herself a rare indulgence, stillness. The Mediterranean shimmered like a promise, waves folding gently against the hull. Photographs from those days would become infamous, yet within them is something often mysticom that looked like peace, not performance. For once, she wasn't being royal or symbolic. She was simply existing. She swam at dawn, answered letters on the deck, and talked about new projects, a global campaign to ban landmines, a series of hospitals for children affected by war, and a small education fund for orphans she had met in Africa. She called these ideas her freedom work. It was activism not out of duty, but identity. Her causes had become her refuge. Friends recall her optimism, her laughter returning in waves. She spoke of finding a permanent home, somewhere between Monaco and Morocco, where she could base her foundation and invite her sons during school breaks. She was considering new staff, new schools, a new rhythm. "I finally feel light," she told one of them, "as if I'm floating toward myself." Yet even amid the sunlight, shadows lingered. The paparazzi were relentless, circling the yacht like gulls. Newspapers dissected every photograph, every rumor of romance. Her private rebirth was turned into spectacle again, the price of her own myth. Still, she smiled, perhaps out of defiance, perhaps because she knew anger only fed the machine she wanted to escape. On August 15th, she returned briefly to London, a quiet visit to see William and Harry before their holiday in Scotland. Witnesses said she looked radiant. To those close to her, she looked ready. Ready for something unnamed, as though life were holding its breath. When she boarded a flight to Paris 2 weeks later, she carried no crown, no agenda, only plans written in notebooks, and hope folded between photographs of her children. To the world, it was another trip. To her, it was a crossing a moment between what she had endured and what she still believed possible. Fate has no taste for irony, but history does. That golden summer would become her epitaph, replayed in endless loops of flash and flame. Yet, beneath the noise, the truth remained simpler. Diana did not die running from the past. She died moving toward the future she was just beginning to touch. Paris was supposed to be a stopover, not a destination. A brief pause before returning to London, before the boys, before the life she was still assembling piece by piece. The Ritz awaited, polished and expectant, a stage she had not chosen. Cameras gathered at the hotel doors like moths, circling a single flame. She knew they would be there. They always were. What she could not know was that the city of love would become her last confessor. Inside the suite, the lights were low, the curtains drawn against 100 telephoto lenses. She made a few phone calls, one to a friend about a new home near the sea, another to her sons, who laughed on the other end, carefree in Scotland's rain. The conversation was brief, but witnesses remember her smiling afterward, pressing the phone to her chest as if saving the sound for later. The night moved uneasily. Security argued about routes, photographers loitered in alleys, engines idled. Diana appeared calm, used to chaos. "Let's just go," she reportedly said, exhaustion softening her voice. She wanted air, freedom, anonymity, simple things that had always eluded her. At 12:19 a.m., the Mercedes left the Ritz. What followed became global obsession headlights in pursuit, a tunnel of blinding white, the collapse of metal, and silence. But this story, her story, is more than that single stolen minute. In the wreckage's aftermath, Paris became a cathedral of flashbulbs. Reporters wept between questions. Strangers gathered outside hospitals, clutching flowers like votive offerings. The world watched live as hope faded, second by second, and realized that for once, tragedy had no villain easy enough to name. Within hours, her life was reduced to fragments, pearls scattered across asphalt, a shoe on the pavement, a ring glinting under artificial light. The woman who had fought for privacy became the most photographed corpse on earth. Yet even then, dignity lingered. The nurse later said, her face looked peaceful, as if she had finally outrun something. The following day, the headlines were merciless. Fairy tale ends, Queen of Hearts dead, but fairy tales end because they belong to imagination. Diana's story was always real, raw, defiant, unfinished. That night, somewhere in the same city, church bells rang softly for her. In that sound, Paris seemed to apologize. The Seine flowed, indifferent as ever, carrying with it the reflection of camera flashes still haunting the tunnel's walls. If fate had allowed her just one more dawn, perhaps she would have boarded a plane to a quieter coast, perhaps written another chapter in her new life's plan. Instead, she became legend, a title she never asked for. And like all legends, she was sealed in paradox, forever gone, forever pursued. Death could not silence her. It only amplified what she had been trying to say. In the years after that night in Paris, the world spoke of Diana as symbol, saint martyr. But symbols are safe, and Diana was never safe to the systems she defied. Her true legacy is not carved in marble or in memory of tragedy. It lives in the quiet revolutions she ignited by refusing to obey. Her funeral, watched by billions, was meant to close the story. Instead, it opened a new chapter the monarchy had not planned to read. The public wept not for a princess, but for a woman who had dared to be human in a world that punished humanity. In that shared grief, something shifted. The distance between royalty and those they ruled cracked like old plaster. The people saw themselves in her, and they did not forget. Years later, her sons would speak of her laughter, her compassion, her refusal to look away from suffering. William and Harry walked through minefields and hospitals in her name, not as reenactment, but as inheritance. Her empathy became their bloodlines. Correction, a reminder that compassion can be a crown heavier than gold. Charities she founded flourished, outliving the institutions that once doubted her. Campaigns for AIDS awareness, for children's mental health, for the global ban on landmines each carried her fingerprints, steady and unyielding. Even now, her name opens doors in places where monarchy never reached. She built bridges that outlasted palaces. The world still measures itself against her absence. When crowds gather outside Kensington Palace each August, they bring more than flowers, they bring memory as protest. Every candle lit, there is a small rebellion against forgetting, a whisper that says she mattered beyond pageantry. In the private world, she had envisioned sunlight on sea. Laughter without microphones, she found posthumous completion. The freedom she never lived to enjoy became the one she gave to others. Freedom for victims to be heard, for compassion to be fashionable, for vulnerability to be strength. History loves its neat endings, but Diana's refuses to end. She exists wherever people question power, draped in ceremony, wherever someone refuses to let reputation erase truth. She taught the world that grace can be weapon, and that kindness can, in its quiet way, overthrow empires. Beyond Balmoral, beyond Paris, beyond even death, she remains what she was becoming, that final summer free. Not free from life, but free from expectation, from performance, from the cruel arithmetic of privilege. If this story stayed with you tonight, let it linger. Leave a thought, a silence, a breath for the woman who turned captivity into courage. And remember, some truths deserve to be remembered, because freedom, once imagined, never truly dies.